So when I make a bead, the first thing I need to do is put bead release on my mandrel so that the bead will come off the mandrel once I've made it. And that's what's in this pot. It's a bit like runny clay. And all I do is simply dip the mandrel in, and that's it. And I would normally dip lots of those for a bead making session and put them in a pot of sand to dry. For this demonstration, I'm going to dry this bead release in the flame. So the next thing I'm going to do is turn the torch on. Introduce the oxygen to get the flame the colour that I need it, and which is the working. This is what we call a neutral flame. And I'm going to gently warm that bead release so that it dries. Now this bead I'm going to make is a flower bead, because everybody likes to ask me, how do I get the flowers inside the beads? So I need to make a thin piece of glass that we call a stringer to put the flower petals down onto the bead when I've made that. So my next step is to pull a stringer of glass in the colour I've chosen for the flowers. This is actually called periwinkle, this colour. So I'm just heating the glass, and I'm trying to get like what I call a gather of glass on the end of the rod, like that. And then I'll take my pliers, pinch the end, and at the right moment just gently pull until I've got a long, thin piece of glass that I can use to apply my flowers. And then just break it off. I'm just going to put that down over here. I'm going to make another one because, I'm going to be putting a few flowers down. I wouldn't want to run out when I've got, all but like my last few petals on. So just melting the end of the glass, bring it out of the flame, and at the right moment just grab a little piece with the pliers and gently pull. Like so. So the next thing is to make the bead, and I've chosen a purple here. So back to the mandrel, and just as making the stringer, I'm putting the glass in the flame and gently warming the end. Sometimes, depending on the glass, you have to do this quite slowly to avoid that happening. So that was a good demonstration of thermal shock. What's happened there is that there's been stress within the end of that glass because it has been heated at another point, and as I've put it back in the flame and rewarmed it, it's cracked. Glass doesn't like to be warmed and cooled very quickly, as you may have found out if you've ever put boiling water into one of your nice fine glasses. So I'm going to get a gather of glass on the end of this rod again, and then I'm going to wrap it around the mandrel by applying it to the mandrel and then turning the mandrel away from me. The mandrel needs to be warm enough for the glass to stick, but you don't really need to have it glowing. And now I'm just adding more glass to get the bead to the size that I want for this particular demonstration. So I'm going to make one that's plenty big enough so that when it's made I can use it to show everybody the bead that was made for this demo. So just keep adding the glass. I've got my flame a lot hotter than I would normally work actually, so that I can do this quite quickly. It would normally take me a little bit longer than this because I like to work slowly, and then I can keep everything under a little bit better control and use gravity to shape the bead. And I think just one more wrap of glass and then we'll call that enough. I'm also working at a slightly funny angle so that you can see what I'm doing. I use the flame to cut the glass. I'm now fiddling around trying to pick up those bits of stringer that we made to start with. So I want to get that bead into a nice round shape. And then once it is nice and round, I'll let it cool slightly before adding dots to form flowers with. Do my final bit of shaping out of the flame. So hopefully you can see that's a nice little round bead. Now when I apply flowers to a bead, I'll apply just the first petal and then I'll go to the next flower. This just helps me to get my spacing nice and hopefully get them reasonably evenly spaced. Then I'll go back and add the rest of the petals. I usually do flowers that have 5 petals. I've never actually done any with more than 5, but I quite often do flowers with just 4 petals or even just 3, depending on what design I want. So I'm now building up these, adding little dots to the bead in groups of 5. Hopefully you can see that. And continue all the way around until you've turned each one of those spacer dots into a little group of 5 dots. You can see I can touch the glass quite close to where it's touching the flame. The glass doesn't get hot, the mandrel doesn't get hot. Well, not where I need to be touching it anyway. Obviously where it's in the flame it's hot, but the heat doesn't conduct up through the mandrel or the glass, which surprised me before I actually made beads. So now I've got my groups of dots on there. I'm going to melt them flat. So there I've melted them flat, and when they come back, as it cools, the colour comes back into it. You can probably see that it's in little groups, and they look fairly flower-like at the moment, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to spot heat in the centre where all the dots meet, and with this poker I'm going to push a hole, and that will draw the petals down into the bead. I need to wait for the colour to come back so I can't see where to push, making them more petal shaped. So I'm heating the group of dots and then pushing where they all come together in the centre. So now they're looking a little bit even more like flowers. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a layer of clear glass over the top of these flowers and aim to cover the whole flower. That will produce a little bubble at the centre of the flower. Sometimes I just leave the flowers on the surface of the bead, and on the centre I'll just have a contrasting colour. So you can see I'm melting quite a big runny blob of clear and pushing it down onto the flower to cover it. Trying to cover it in one go, which I don't always achieve, but this one looks like it's gone according to plan. Now I'm going to just add I can see the petals peeping out in certain points, so I'm just going to add more glass in the gaps to make sure that those petals are covered. If they're not completely covered, what happens is the opaque glass that we've used to make those flowers with will bleed up through the layer of clear, and then it all starts to look a little bit messy. So I'm just literally evening out the amount of glass on the bead as well as I go. I'm going to swap hands now, so I might put my hand in the way of the camera for a minute or two while I do the other side. So almost there. When I push the clear on initially, you have to make sure that the flower itself is actually quite cool, otherwise you will pull the flower up into the clear as you pull the clear away from the bead. So there's quite a lot of you've got to have everything just at the right temperature a lot of the time. So now that's all a bit lumpy bumpy, but I will melt it in, and you will have flowers underneath the surface of the bead with bubbles at the centre, if everything's gone according to plan. The trick here is to melt it all in without letting it all spin around. So that's the bead. I'm just going to turn the torch off, and hopefully you'll see the colours come back and you'll be able to see the flowers.